rain fell in sheets that night, striking the windows with a rhythm that matched the rapid beat of Daniel Ashcroft's heart. The air inside the house was heavy, pressing against his chest as though the walls themselves had begun to close in. His hand shook as he reached for the phone, every second of hesitation stretching into an eternity. When the operator's voice finally crackled through, his words burst out in fragments. "Please help me, my wife, she isn't breathing. She just collapsed. I don't know what happened. You must hurry." The operator's tone remained steady, asking him to check for a pulse, to begin compressions, to remain calm. Daniel followed instructions with trembling hands, his voice breaking as he insisted that Eleanor's chest did not rise, that her eyes had gone still. His voice carried the raw edge of panic, but there was something else buried beneath. A strange hollowness, a distance that didn't belong in the sound of a man watching his wife die. Outside, the storm drowned the street in silence. Only the wail of approaching sirens pierced the downpour, flashing lights painting streaks of red and blue against slick pavement. Neighbors peeked through curtains, shadows moving across glass, each of them unsettled by the growing presence of police cars lining the road. When the officers stepped inside, they found Daniel kneeling on the carpet beside Eleanor's body. She lay unnaturally still, her face pale beneath strands of damp hair. The room was suffocatingly quiet, save for Daniel's labored breathing and the crackle of the radio in the officer's hand. "She just dropped," Daniel stammered, eyes wide, hands smeared with the effort of failed resuscitation. "We were talking and then she was gone. I don't understand." "You have to do something." The first paramedic crouched beside Eleanor, checking for any trace of life. Within moments, his expression hardened into the grim mask of finality. A shake of the head confirmed what the silence had already declared. Eleanor Ashcroft was dead. Daniel recoiled, clutching his face, his cries echoing through the dimly lit room. Yet the officers exchanged quiet looks, their attention pulled to details that clashed with his desperate story. The living room bore subtle signs of disturbance: a toppled lamp in the corner, a cushion pressed to the floor, the faint tang of spilled wine mingling with the metallic scent of fear. One officer's eyes lingered on Daniel's hands. The tremor in his fingers didn't seem to belong only to grief. There was sweat beading on his brow, and his gaze refused to meet theirs for more than a moment. "Mr. Ashcroft," the officer said evenly, "we'll need you to step into the other room while we examine the scene." Daniel hesitated, lips parting as though to argue, then slowly rose to his feet. His eyes darted toward Eleanor's body one final time, a strange flicker crossing his face, grief, disbelief, or something darker that none of them could yet name. As the paramedics quietly prepared to move her, the lead detective leaned close to his partner and whispered just loud enough to be heard above the storm. He said she fainted. "That doesn't look like fainting to me." The question hung in the air, colder than the rain outside, and with it began a night that would unravel far more than a simple tragedy, dragging every hidden secret of the Ashcroft home into the light. The rain had eased by morning, leaving the Ashcroft home wrapped in a damp hush that clung to the walls like smoke. Inside, officers moved with measured steps, photographing every overturned cushion and faint scuff across the carpet. What had first sounded like tragedy was already shaping into something darker, something heavier than a sudden collapse. Daniel sat at the dining table, shoulders hunched, his fingers knotted together so tightly his knuckles blanched. Across from him, Detective Margaret Hensley laid her notepad flat, her pen scratching quietly as she began. "You said she was fine yesterday evening?" Her voice was calm but unyielding. Daniel nodded, eyes flickering to the glass of untouched water before him. "Yes, we had supper together. She complained of a headache. I went to fetch her some tablets, and when I came back, she had slumped to the floor. I tried to wake her. I rang immediately. I don't know what else I could have done." Hensley studied him. "And yet the lamp in the corner is broken. The cushion on the floor is stained with wine. It doesn't look like someone simply slumped." A flush crept up Daniel's neck. "We argued, I suppose." "About nothing. Just a silly row." His words wavered, the syllables dragged out as though he were building them from air. Meanwhile, outside the house, neighbors had begun to gather in small knots. Some spoke in whispers, Others shook their heads as if confirming long-held suspicions. One, an older woman named Mrs. Pennington, clutched her shawl tightly as she murmured to another officer. They shouted, often. I heard her crying last week through the wall. Husband said not to interfere, but something wasn't right in that house. Back inside, Hensley pressed on. Daniel, your wife had bruises on her arm. Do you know how those came to be? His eyes widened, but the answer came too quickly. She bruised easily. She was fragile, delicate. Even bumping into a table left a mark. Ask anyone. The detective scribbled something down, her expression unreadable. Yet the silence that followed filled the room with pressure, until Daniel leaned back, exhaling through clenched teeth. She was not herself lately, restless, distracted. I tried to care for her, but she wouldn't let me in. You mustn't think. He broke off, catching himself before the words grew too sharp. As night descended, the Ashcroft living room felt less like a home and more like a stage frozen mid-scene. The shadows stretched across Eleanor's abandoned slippers, across the faint smear on the rug that none of the officers spoke about aloud. Every corner seemed to whisper that this was not sudden, not simple, and not clean. Hensley closed her notebook and exchanged a look with her partner. Her voice lowered, carrying a weight meant for the room rather than the man before her. We'll need to go deeper. Neighbors hear one story. His mouth tells another. Somewhere between is the truth she never had the chance to speak. The paramedics had long since taken Eleanor's body, but her absence lingered like a heavy echo. She emerged in fragments, through neighbors' recollections, through the guarded slips in Daniel's voice, through the unspoken tension that hung over every detail of their home. Each piece built an image of a woman worn thin by fear and silence. Daniel rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand, muttering under his breath. I loved her. She knows that. She must have known. But the detective watching him only tightened her jaw, because love in this house looked far too much like control. And somewhere, hidden beneath the still warm walls, Eleanor's story was waiting to be told in full. Detective Hensley sat in her office long after dusk, the desk lamp casting a pale halo over the growing stack of notes. Eleanor Ashcroft was beginning to take shape, not through Daniel's trembling claims, but through the voices of those who had known her best. The first interview came from Harriet Vale, a former colleague who had grown close to Eleanor during long hours at the gallery. Harriet's hands twisted nervously in her lap as she spoke. She told me she felt trapped, that Daniel didn't like her going out alone, didn't like her talking to people without him present. At first I thought it was protectiveness, but she looked frightened, detective. Proper frightened. Hensley wrote every word carefully, her pen etching a portrait of a woman quietly suffocating behind closed doors. Later, another testimony added darker shades. Clara Mortimer, an old friend from Eleanor's university years, leaned across the table with eyes brimming. She rang me one evening in tears, said he called her weak, said she made him look foolish in front of others. Then he'd apologize the next morning with flowers, with promises. It was always the same cycle. Eleanor doubted herself so much she started wondering if she really was everything he said she was. It was classic control, Hensley thought, the kind that stripped a person piece by piece until they no longer recognized their own reflection. But what truly chilled the detective were the words that came not from friends, but from Eleanor herself. Hidden in a drawer beneath a bundle of scarves, officers had found a leather-bound journal, the pages soft with wear. Under the glow of the lamp, Hensley read Eleanor's looping handwriting, the ink blotched where tears had once fallen. I try to remind myself who I used to be. He says I am forgetful, fragile, unsteady, and I almost believe it. But in moments of clarity, I see what he is doing. I hear my own thoughts and know they are mine, not his. Still, the silence after his anger feels worse than the shouting. I feel erased. The words clawed at Hensley's chest. This was not a marriage of devotion. It was a theater of power, staged behind a respectable front. Daniel, however, spoke with conviction when questioned again. He leaned forward in the interview room, voice low and measured. I adored her. She struggled with moods, that much is true. I tried everything to keep her safe. She was fragile, and I had to be strong for both of us. People will twist her unhappiness into a weapon, but you must see it for what it was, a sickness inside her. I only ever loved her. The detectives exchanged glances. His words dripped with rehearsed tenderness, yet behind them lay a steady undertone of blame. Eleanor's fragility, her instability, her weakness, all defined on his terms, never hers. The contrast between voices was stark. To friends, Eleanor had spoken of fear. In her own writing, she confessed to feeling erased. To Daniel, she was nothing more than a broken figure clutched tightly in his arms, incapable without him. Somewhere in this divide lay the truth, and it was beginning to smell of something rotten. That night, Hensley walked through the Ashcroft kitchen once more. The detectives had left markers on the floor where a wine glass had shattered. Its crimson contents dried into dark stains across the tiles. She stared at it for a long time, imagining the sound of glass breaking mid-argument. The way Eleanor might have flinched, the way Daniel's voice might have dropped low and cutting. The silence of the house was unbearable, as though the walls still held their arguments in echoes. And as Hensley closed her notebook, one question pressed louder than all the rest. Did Eleanor truly collapse? Or had the life been pressed from her in the very place she once called home? The house had been searched twice already, yet Detective Hensley insisted on a third sweep. Something about the walls felt too clean, too curated, as if Eleanor's life had been scrubbed of every trace that did not fit Daniel's version of her. It was during that final search that Constable Whitfield, crouched low by the bedroom wardrobe, drew out a shoebox tucked beneath a line of shoes. The box was old, its cardboard softened at the edges, tied with a faded ribbon that had once been blue. Inside lay letters neatly folded, their ink faded but still legible. Alongside them sat a small stack of black and white photographs, Eleanor in her 20s, standing beside a man whose arm curved protectively at her shoulder. His face was sharp, quiet, his smile reserved. Hensley lifted the first letter beneath the beam of her torch. My dearest Eleanor, I still think of the autumn evenings by the river. Your laughter carried through the air like something that belonged only to me. Life without you has been long, but I hope one day we will find our way back. The letters spanned years, though recent dates appeared among them. The handwriting never wavered. Whoever he was, this man had not vanished from Eleanor's life. When Daniel was confronted, his reaction came swift and biting. Ridiculous. Ancient history. She had a foolish suitor before me, nothing more. She loved me, she chose me, and I will not have her name dragged through the mud by childish fantasies written on scraps of paper. Hensley's eyes narrowed. Then why keep them, Mr. Ashcroft? Why preserve them so carefully? Daniel's lips thinned, and for the first time, silence held him. His eyes darted to the floor, as if the truth had left a trace he could not erase. Later that evening, Hensley visited Clara Mortimer once more. Clara's face paled at the mention of the letters. Eleanor told me about him, she admitted softly. His name was Alistair Rowe. She loved him once deeply before she met Daniel. They drifted apart, but she said he wrote to her again last year. She never told me if she replied, only that Daniel could never find out. She feared what he might do if he thought she still carried a flame for another man. The revelation struck like a blade. Eleanor, already smothered in her marriage, may have been reaching back toward a past where she had felt safe, cherished, alive. If Daniel had discovered that link, it would not have been mere jealousy. It would have been betrayal carved into his bones. Hensley returned to her desk, laying the photographs in a row. Eleanor's younger self stared back, radiant and unburdened. Beside her, Alistair's expression was unreadable, a man whose love had lingered in shadows. The detective's pen hovered above the page, yet the question refused to shape into words. Did Daniel confront her about the letters? Did Eleanor confess to more than memories? And in that moment, when the wine glass shattered across the kitchen floor, had Daniel's anger been sharpened by the ghost of another man? The past was no longer a backdrop. It had stepped into the present with quiet, devastating force, and as Hensley set down her pen, she knew the next interrogation would not be about whether Eleanor collapsed, but about what Daniel did when the past finally caught up with him. The interrogation room smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp stone, a space stripped of comfort and designed for truth. Daniel Ashcroft sat rigid on the metal chair, his hands clasped so tightly that the veins on his knuckles stood out in stark relief. A single strip of light illuminated the table, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. His face was caught half in darkness, half in glare, like a man teetering between guilt and denial. Detective Hensley watched him closely, pen poised above her notepad. "Daniel, we've spoken to Eleanor's friends. We've read her journal. We've seen the letters. You need to tell us exactly what happened in that room last night." Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His voice cracked at first, then steadied into something rehearsed. She collapsed. "That is the truth. I had nothing to do with her death." Hensley leaned forward. "And the broken lamp? The bruises? The wine glass smashed across the tiles?" He flinched, jaw tightening. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then with a sudden exhale, he spoke again, faster this time. "We argued. She said she wanted to leave, that she had made a mistake marrying me. I couldn't bear to hear it. I grabbed her arm, yes, perhaps too hard. She struggled, she always struggled when she was overwrought. I tried to hold her still, but I swear to you, I never killed her." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Hensley's partner, Detective Rawdon, slammed his fist lightly against the table, the sharp sound echoing. "You call that love?" Pinning her down when she begged to be free. Daniel's eyes flared. "You don't understand her. She was fragile, always on the edge of breaking. I was the only thing keeping her together. She would have fallen apart without me." Hensley's voice cut through his defense like a blade. "Or perhaps she fell apart because of you." He shook his head violently, his composure splintering. "No, she threatened to leave every week. To run back to a man who never cared for her. I gave her everything. She needed me. She just refused to see it." The mask was slipping. Beneath the controlled tones of devotion, a raw, festering anger leaked through. His words painted Eleanor not as a partner, but as a possession slipping from his grasp. Hensley tapped her pen slowly against the table. "You admit to grabbing her, to pushing too hard. What happened next?" Daniel's breathing grew shallow. He rubbed his temple, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "She fell. She slipped, perhaps. The floor was wet from the glass. I tried to catch her, but she hit her head. I panicked. That's all it was. Tragic accident." Rawdon's jaw clenched. "And yet you told us she simply fainted. Why lie if it was only an accident?" Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. His gaze flickered, searching for ground that would not crumble beneath him. The silence that followed spoke louder than any admission. Hensley leaned back, her eyes narrowing. His story had shifted too many times, each version bending under the weight of evidence. What remained was a murky truth where love bled into violence, where control dressed itself as devotion, and where Eleanor's death was neither fully confessed nor fully denied. As Daniel buried his face in his hands, the detectives exchanged a glance that carried the heaviness of uncertainty. Was this a broken man stumbling over guilt, or a master manipulator weaving lies into every breath? The question lingered, unresolved, as the sound of rain began once more against the station windows, a reminder that the storm outside had found its echo within these walls. And with the trial drawing near, the battle for truth was only just beginning. The courtroom was packed from the moment the trial began, the air thick with curiosity and unease. Reporters filled the benches, pens scratching with hunger for scandal, while neighbors craned forward to catch every flicker of expression. To some, Daniel Ashcroft was a grieving widower, undone by tragedy. To others, he was a polished liar who had perfected his mask of sorrow. Daniel sat at the defense table in a dark suit, his posture impeccable, his face carefully void of emotion. His hands, though, betrayed him, fingers tapping in restless patterns betraying the storm beneath. Across from him, Detective Hensley sat silently, her notes resting in her lap. She knew that everything now rested not in her hands, but in how the story of Eleanor Ashcroft would be told to 12 strangers. The prosecution wasted no time. They held up the battered leather journal, placing it on the evidence table with a gravity that drew the room into silence. "This," the prosecutor said, voice low, "is Eleanor's voice. Not Daniel's, not speculation. Her own words, written when she believed no one would ever read them." The jurors leaned forward as passages were read aloud. "I feel erased. He tells me I'm nothing without him. I fear the silence more than the shouting." Each line struck like a hammer against Daniel's polished exterior. His face twitched, but he kept his gaze fixed ahead, refusing to break. The defense countered with equal force, painting Eleanor as fragile, prone to melancholy, a woman who had battled inner storms long before Daniel entered her life. They described him as a man devoted to saving her from herself, a man whose only crime was loving too fiercely. Witnesses were called. Harriet Vale's voice trembled as she spoke of Eleanor's fear. Clara Mortimer recounted the night of tears, the apologies that followed like chains. Neighbors described shouts that pierced the silence of midnight. Each testimony wove a pattern of unrest, yet Daniel's barrister chipped at them, reminding the court that arguments did not equal murder. Then came the letters, the photographs of Eleanor with Alistair Rowe. The prosecution argued that jealousy had been the spark. The defense insisted they were relics of a past long forgotten, twisted now into a false motive. Daniel's jaw tightened at every mention of Alistair, but he never let the mask fully fall. When Daniel himself took the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. His voice was calm, measured. "I loved my wife. I admit we argued that I held her too tightly in anger. I should not have, but I never wished her harm. She slipped, she fell, and I will live forever with the weight of failing to save her." His words carried the rhythm of sincerity, yet beneath them lingered the same troubling undertone Hensley had heard from the beginning. A man who framed love as possession, who wrapped control in the language of devotion. The final day arrived. The judge's gavel struck, silencing the murmurs. Daniel stared ahead, unblinking as the verdict was read. "Guilty of manslaughter," gasps rippled across the courtroom. Some wept in relief, others shook their heads in disbelief. Daniel closed his eyes, his expression unreadable, as though the word had only confirmed what he had long known would come. Hensley did not celebrate. The diary had given Eleanor a voice in death, yet doubt still gnawed at the edges of justice. Had Daniel killed her in rage, or had he truly let her slip through his grasp? The verdict offered punishment, but not certainty. As Daniel was led away in chains, the city remained divided, whispering questions that would never be fully answered. And Eleanor Ashcroft's final words lingered in the air like smoke, a reminder that truth, in the end, may have been buried with her.